guys, welcome back. Now before I get started, I just want to say a huge thank you to your kind comments on my last video, which was my first video shot in my new kitchen. Also, how much you loved the buttercream technique, and I've seen loads of you sending me photos of you trying it out, and they all look incredible, so thank you. This tutorial is all about ISOMALT. Now, I've already got a video showing an ISOMALT sale on my gender reveal cake, but I thought to show you 3 different techniques today using ISOMALT. If you've never heard of the stuff, this is it. So it's a white powder. It's readily available online. I've got it on my Amazon list, which I've listed in the comments box. It's basically a sugar substitute. So it is edible. I wouldn't recommend eating a ton of it because it has artificial ingredients in. However, it is safe to put onto cakes, and it's a better alternative to sugar for some things because sugar tends to dissolve in air because of the moisture, whereas ISOMALT is a lot stronger and doesn't dissolve, and you can do really cool things with it too, which I'm going to show you today. Now, what you need is obviously ISOMALT. So I've got the powdered version, but you can get little candies of it, and you can pop them in the microwave and they melt, and it's super easy to use. I prefer using the powder because I can control the amount that I'm using, and I also do it in a pan rather than a microwave just to keep an eye on it, but they both work just as well. It's all about what you do after it's melted. So like I said, I'm going to use a saucepan. So I've got a small saucepan here. I've got some regular gel food coloring. I've got some heat-proof spatulas because it does get hot. And I'm going to shape the ISOMALT over some of these non-stick mats. So I've got my macaron mats here, but you can use plain ones, but again, they have to be heat-proof. You can do it on baking paper, but you don't get a nice wave like I'm going to show you. You also need some pegs or some clips just to hold the mats in place. And for one of the designs, I've got a tall, rounded container over a bottle because this will also help with one of the shapes that I'm going to create. So to start, what I'm going to do is put some ISOMALT powder in the small saucepan. And to be honest, I usually do it roughly by eye, but it's about 100 grams of powder. And all I'm going to do is heat this up gently, and it's going to start melting, and I'm basically going to wait until it's a translucent liquid. That's it. So I'm going to put it on the stove, and the best part about ISOMALT is that it doesn't burn like sugar does. So I would still recommend watching over it because you shouldn't leave anything on a naked flame unwatched, but it doesn't catch like sugar does, so it's a lot more forgiving. So I'm going to watch over it and gently stir it every now and then with a spatula, and then once it's got to the right consistency, I can then go in with the colour. So slowly, the bottom layer starts to melt, so I'm just going to swirl the pan and give it a little stir just so all of the unmelted ISOMALT gets mixed in. So it's still slightly white, so I'm going to leave it a little bit longer so it gets more translucent. And when it's completely melted in, you can turn off the heat and then add the colour. So this is nice and translucent, so now you can add the colour. I'm going to go for a purple to start with, and all it needs is 1 drop. So this colours really easily. I'm going to mix that in, and it should bubble just slightly. And you can see just 1 drop gives it a really dark colour, so you don't want to go too crazy with the colouring. You can also leave it white, that's obviously totally fine, but this is a really easy way to add to the theme of a cake or dessert that you're making. So now it's time to shape. So I'm going to take one of my mats and place it down, and then all I'm going to do is pour over the ISOMALT. Try and get as much out as possible, and so it does start to cool quite quickly. So there's this balance of working with it. So right now it's still really hot. Just going to move it around slightly. And I'm basically watching the movement of it. So at the moment it's still quite runny, but it is starting to thicken. And what you're looking for is for the consistency to kind of just be setting, because you still want to mold it, but you don't want it to run off too much. So I'm just going to wait for quite a large bit to settle. And now I can shape it. So this is probably the easiest shape. I'm going to grab 3 pegs and then bend the mat one way and peg it. Bend it another way and peg it. And maybe just one more. So I'm going to be getting quite an abstract shape. And all this needs doing is being left for about 5 minutes. So it only takes about 5 minutes for it to set completely, which isn't a long time at all. So you can quickly wash stuff or, you know, get on with other things while you're waiting. And then we're going to be able to peel the mat away. Just a little precaution, try not to bend the mat too much because it is quite fragile. So when you start taking the mat off, if you've got very tight bends, you're at risk of cracking the ISOMALT, which brings me to my point, is that it doesn't actually matter if the ISOMALT breaks because you can easily reheat it. But in the meantime, I'm just going to leave this to set and we'll show you what it's like when you take the mat off. So it's been about 5 to 10 minutes and I can feel that the ISOMALT is completely hard. So now to unwrap it, I'm going to carefully remove the pegs. And then I like flipping it over, or to the side at least, and peel away the mat rather than pull the ISOMALT off. And in the tighter creases, just being a little bit more careful with it. Like that. And you get this really cool shape. Now, for me, if I want to put this on top of a cake, I attach it to some buttercream on the top, but because it's quite firm and quite sharp, I can actually just place it in the cake and push it down slightly. Anyway, so this is a really simple way of creating quite a fun topper to a cake. So I'm just going to leave this to the side and get on with a couple more decorations. And just for the purpose of today, I'm going to reuse this pot. So the ISOMALT that's stuck around the saucepan will just remelt. Like I said, it won't burn again, so you can't really do this with caramel, which is why ISOMALT is so great. So I'm gonna go in with a little bit more this time, probably about 150 grams of ISOMALT, and heat this up on the stove just like last time. So while that's heating up, I'm just going to show you what the next decoration I'm going to do. And I've already shown you this in my other video, like I mentioned at the beginning. But basically, you want a rounded, tall shape to mold the mat over. So I've got one of those smoothie cups and I've put it on a bottle just to make it a little bit higher, because basically we're going to put the mat like this. And obviously, if it's too short, the mat will touch the table and you won't get the desired shape that you want. So that's why I make it taller on a bottle. So I'll have this just to the side at the ready, and I will also need my pegs too. So I'm just going to keep an eye on my ISOMALT and then colour it when it's done. So obviously I had a little bit of purple in here anyway, but I'm going to go in with a little bit of red just to change the colour up a little bit. So it's more of a pink. So once again, I'm going to get the non-stick mat ready and pour the ISOMALT onto the surface. I'm going to stick to more of a circular pattern. The other one was a little bit longer. Now, rather than spreading this one out, I'm actually going to leave it a bit because I'm going to drape it over the bottle. If you do it too soon, it's too hot and too wet and it will just come completely sliding down. Obviously, on the other hand, if you leave it too long like this, it's not going to drop at all. So you really have to play with the consistency of it and get used to the temperature of the ISOMALT. I'm going to rotate it just to see the movement. I think that's probably the easiest way. This actually looks like one of those fruit roll-ups I used to eat as a kid, but it definitely doesn't taste like that. So I wouldn't recommend rolling this up and eating it. So once again, you want a little bit of movement. I think that's good. I'm going to get the bottle and place this over the top and very quickly pin it into place. You can see already I'm getting some nice drips forming. Now, some might drip quite a lot and maybe even off the mat, but you can trim them, so it doesn't matter if that happens. So one drip has gone crazy, but I can see the others are actually forming quite nicely. But like I said, if you do have the odd one, you can trim it. So what I would do is just wait a few minutes so it looks like it stopped dripping a bit. And then you get some scissors and just cut where you want it to go. And what will happen is that because it's still warm, it will drip a little bit, so you don't actually get a sharp cut where the scissors were. It will form another drip. And then all this extra, you can put back in the pan and remelt it, or just throw it away. But that should set really nicely. So once again, I'm going to leave this a little bit longer, a good 10 minutes, just to really firm it up. The other shape is a little bit more forgiving, but this you really want to be careful with. So I'll just leave this to the side for it to set and then get on with the final decoration. So once again, reusing the pot because I'm going to go for a more orangey color. So I'm happy with the red that's in there already. And then I'm going to add some yellow. I'm going to go for the smaller amount again, so roughly 80 to 100 grams of ISOMALT, and then heat it up like usual. So once again, the ISOMALT is translucent, but because I had left the color in there before, it's got a slight pink tinge. I'm gonna go in with some yellow, like I said, to make it more of an orange color. And basically I'm going to show you how to make coral. Now this is amazing for any beach themed cake or under the sea cake. Really easy technique and looks great on top of the cake. So I've mixed some yellow in, so it's more of an orangey color. And what you also need for the coral is a measuring jug or a cup of ice. As long as the cup is heat proof, it's okay to use. I prefer the shape of a measuring jug personally, and I've crushed up the ice a bit too. Now you can go directly in with this ISOMALT, but if you want to make it opaque, which is also another really cool effect, you can add some titanium dioxide, which is a powdered white food coloring, the same that I add to white chocolate ganache when I'm making drips. And this is going to make it nice and opaque, which really adds to the effect, and it's more visible on top of the cake too. Once the titanium dioxide's in, you can also see the color more. Now, I actually think I want more of a peachy orange, so I'm gonna go in with a tiny bit of pink. Now, the only thing which you have to bear in mind is that when you put titanium dioxide in, it does become a little bit thicker. So if it does become too thick, you can just heat it up on the hob once again. But I'm happy with the consistency of this, so I can go directly on the ice. So I'll move the towel to one side, bring the ice in, and pour the ISOMALT directly on top. And what's going to happen is that the ISOMALT will fill in all the cracks in between the ice cubes, and naturally it forms this sort of coral shape. Hopefully. So using a see-through jar, you can kind of see what's happening inside, but once again, it does need a minute or two just to completely set. Because you've poured it on top of ice, it's going to set a lot quicker than it has done on the mat. But I'm going to put this to a side and demold the one that I just made before, just to make sure that it's set. Bring this one back. And then this is the scary bit. So because I've got the extra cup underneath, so this is the bit that I cut off. I'm going to take off the cup, remove the bottle, and then remove the pegs. Very carefully demold it. So I'm going to remove the cup, and then how I demold it is actually bring the mat inwards rather than pull it upwards. Can be a little bit fiddly. The last thing you want to hear is a crack, but that's come out beautifully. So really happy with that, and that is so dramatic to put on top of a cake. Sometimes I just put one of these and you don't need any other decoration on top. It's dramatic enough. Plus the original, which now looks a little bit underwhelming compared to the pink one, but it's still a really cool effect to put on top of the cake as part of the decorations perhaps, and also so much easier to make. So when you are unmolding your coral, bear in mind there's a lot of melted water in here, so I like to grab myself a bowl and firstly pour out any melted ice before I start pulling out the ISOMALT. So I can see that a little bit's broken off, but to be honest, I use this ISOMALT technique as part of the decoration, so it's nice to dot a few bits around, and I've also got some paper here just to soak up any water. Now the thing with this technique is that you never know how it's going to turn out because it's totally random. So another piece has broken, but you can start to see how incredible the shape is, and it really looks like coral growing. So ideally you may want one big bit to be. Little broken pieces can go within the decorations of the cake. So I'm actually kind of in love with these little bits of coral, even though I had one big piece in mind. So as you can see, there's lots to be done with ISOMALT. It's a wonderful ingredient and an amazing cake decoration too. The best way to store it is try and put it on the cake as last minute as possible. But I actually store it in airtight containers. So get yourself a big Tupperware box. Saying that, I've actually put this on a cake in the fridge in a box, and it hasn't melted. It went a little bit sticky, but I think it's natural, but it didn't affect the actual ISOMALT shape, and it was fine for 4 days in the fridge. So like I said, it's a lot more forgiving than sugar is. It doesn't go anywhere. I wouldn't start snacking on this whole bit because it doesn't taste the nicest, but it is perfectly safe to put on a cake or dessert. So I hope you found this video helpful. Please try it out. Get yourself some ISOMALT. I promise you, you won't regret it. More tutorials and videos on the way, and in the meantime, I hope you have a great week and see you soon.